Shout out to G-Man Boxing.
Alright, people. Eddie Hearn said last week that Anthony Joshua was potentially looking at taking an interim fight whilst they wait for the situation over there in Ukraine with Oleksandr Usyk to, just die down a little bit before obviously the rematch gets announced. Because God knows at this stage it could be, I was thinking May or June. We could be looking at maybe September again, maybe September, October next year, a full year. And, for Anthony Joshua, obviously the inactivity mightn't help him. Usyk, Usyk's been inactive for a couple of years now in terms of he's not been fighting as regularly. It never seems to really hinder him, which I'm surprised at actually, because you'd think for a pure boxer like him it would, but Usyk lives the life in and out of the ring. He really does. But an interim fight for Anthony Joshua may do him the world of good. It may help him dust off some of the cobwebs. Obviously he went straight into a rematch with Andy Ruiz. Andy Ruiz is not Oleksandr Usyk. But it got me thinking, who would they be putting him in there with? We saw Sam Jones say, look, Joe Joyce is ready. I kind of touched on that briefly in the midweek report. But a name that was thrown in here by Dimitri Salida, who is the promoter of Otto Wallin. Otto Wallin even chived in himself. I'm going to quote him here directly. I had a really good fight with Fury, sent him to the hospital, which he did indeed. 47 stitches, and was probably Fury's hardest fight so far. Definitely a case made with a different referee. That fight could have been stopped because it was a bad cut. It really was. And Fury didn't look good in that fight at all. That was the fight where, John Fury was saying that Fury was too light. And that was the end of Ben Davison after that. So, Otto Wallin, what he's saying there is true. It was a very tough fight for Tyson Fury. I'd say the hardest fight Fury ever had was probably the first John McDermott fight. That's probably the hardest fight of his career, you would say, because even in the trilogy fight Wilder, yes, he was dropped, but he was beating Wilder up. Yes, he was dropped, but he was in control thereafter. He was dropped twice actually. He also goes on to say, if you look at Usyk and you're trying to find someone that's similar to him, I'm obviously the best option. They know that I'm interested in the fight and I want the fight, and that's pretty much there. Oh yeah, and he says, and had it been any other opponent in there, I know he's talking about Fury. I'm just trying to see if there's anything more. Wallin said the only issue with this fight is that I might be too much of a risk for them. I'd have a chance of beating them. Before I fought Fury, no one really knew about me or thought that I'd do anything in that fight. But after the fight, I really showed that I belong on that level and that I can handle myself. That fight has been more of a win for me, if anything. Just to interrupt there, Otto Wallin is spot on. If you see, Otto Wallin has the right mindset in this regard, right? He went in with Tyson Fury, no one thought anything of him, right? And I'll be the first, but I didn't really think anything of him. I know a lot of people didn't think much of Otto Wallin because of the whole Tom Schwartz thing, but he was much better than that. And in defeat, his stock rose. You see, here's the thing you need to remember, and this is the thing that kind of irritates me about the modern game of boxing, is that people put so much stock in the O. Oh, if the O goes, it's a night. Oh, I don't want to risk the O. If you go in there and you lose in a very competitive fight and you have your success, even in defeat, your stock will raise, as it did with Otto Wallin. So he's bang on the money there when he says that. But people are more hesitant to take a fight against me now, which is a kind of catch-22 in that sense, because Wallin, his stock rose from that. So people were talking about him a lot more, but Wallin brings no money. He really doesn't. So, in that regard, you're not going to want to fight him because it's risky. It is. Wallin went on to say, we had 2 fights in the amateurs which were wars. Could have gone either way. He won the 2 decisions. But they were good fights, and that would be reason for him to look and say, hey, this would really be a good fight. It'd be entertaining. I'm a worthy opponent and a good fight for him. They actually sparred back in 2015, did AJ and Wallin. If that fight happened, it'd be a very good fight. I definitely think it would be. I think it'd be a good opponent for Anthony Joshua. It wouldn't be without its risks. And there's several reasons why I think that if this fight was an interim fight, it could likely be that they go for Otto Wallin. Obviously, it would mean that if AJ went in there with Otto Wallin and he beat him in decisive fashion, Obviously, he's going to chuck that at Tyson Fury and say, well, you could have easily lost this fight with a different referee. Could have been stopped on that cut. I took care of this guy. No real issues. Obviously, there's that. There's the fact that you're dealing with a fella southpaw. Now, obviously, Otto Wallin, you can't really find another heavyweight who's going to mimic Oleksandr Usyk. But the more experience you get in there with southpaws, the better it's going to be. Because, especially a heavyweight, you don't get many top level southpaws. I mean, like, obviously Ortiz had his day, but he was, obviously Ortiz, like, nowadays, I mean, Jesus Christ, God knows. But, if Frank Sanchez isn't the southpaw, does he fight orthodox? Because if Frank Sanchez would be your ideal kind of sparring partner you'd take in that regard, but I'm pretty sure he fights in the orthodox stance. Correct me if I'm wrong there on that, which is very uncommon for Cubans. Normally fight southpaw, I'm pretty sure. If I'm wrong, feel free to correct me on that. But yes, obviously you'd want more sparring of a southpaw. Wallin is a southpaw. He's not the biggest puncher in the world. Otto Wallin is he's more a slashing puncher. He's the kind of guy who'll rip your face up as opposed to, ripping your head off with one shot. That's kind of Otto Wallin. Having said that, I don't think AJ's chin, he's not a mere Can David Price, guys like that. I remember Seth Mitchell back in the day. He's not at their level of chinniness, but he definitely can be hurt, AJ, and I reckon Wallin potentially could hurt him. It's possible. Eddie Hearn as well maybe would feel that he owes Otto Wallin something. I'll tell you why. Because Otto Wallin was meant to headline at the O2 with Dylan White. And not only did Otto Wallin not get the headline, he didn't get the fight at all. And that camp would have cost him money. He trains in New York, and I think that's where he's based, but obviously family are based in Sweden, so he couldn't go there. And he didn't get out on that card. So maybe Eddie Hearn, because Eddie Hearn can be good like this, maybe he's thinking, do you know what? You missed out on a couple of mil, you lost money in training camp. We have an opening. AJ needs an opponent. You're not a bad fighter. And maybe he's thinking there's a bit less risk and I do kind of owe you a date. So there you go. Potentially that could be. Otto Wallin got a lot of stick for his performance against Kamil Sokolowski. I think it was on the Eubank Williams undercard. Now, people were saying, oh, he's a hype job. Oh, he was never that good. And what I'd say about that fight is that he took that fight on 10 days, 2 weeks notice. He was probably over a stone heavier than we're used to seeing him. He was in there with Sokolowski, who it's hard to look good against him anyway. He's a very tricky journeyman who comes to win, and he's a lot better than his record suggests. One would make you wonder, as I've said several times, if he was managed by MTK or someone like that from the start, how far could he have gone? Not the world titles or anything like that, but certainly could have done something in British European level. Who knows? Because he worked as a truck driver full time as well as box. But when you've only had, and I doubt Otto Wallin would have even probably been sparring properly going into that fight, because as I said, it came up so short, so he wouldn't have been adequately prepared. So when you take the lack of preparation, journeyman in Sokolowski, who is one of them journeymen where he's tricky, he's awkward, he will make you work for the win. Even if you stop, you're working for that win. So I don't look at that performance from Wallin and say he's that level. He's no good. He's much better than that fight suggests, in my opinion, anyway. So I don't think Wallin is a terrible opponent as an interim fight for AJ, not in the least. Be quite an interesting fight. I could see Wallin. Wallin is messy. He's tricky. We did meet in the amateurs. He was a good amateur, was Otto Wallin. Be an interesting fight. Be a very interesting fight. Obviously, if you're talking about making the most money, you're talking Joe Joyce. Joe Joyce would definitely do good numbers with AJ. I find that fight very risky. I'd pick AJ, but that's a very, very risky fight against Joe Joyce. You're dealing with someone who is very tough, very physically strong, takes a good shot. And people would say, oh, wait, AJ, he hits so hard, he'd be able to hurt Joe Joyce. And yeah, I'm sure AJ hits hard enough to bother Joe Joyce. I mean, Joe Joyce has a very good chin, but you wouldn't want to take too many of AJ's bombs. But Joe Joyce hits tremendously hard himself. And best believe if he lands even a semblance of a hard shot on AJ, because Joe Joyce has just such big, heavy hands, big clubbing shots, AJ's going to feel them shots and he's going to get hurt. Make no mistake about it. So, be interested. Watch the space. We'll watch the story unfold with AJ Usyk. Who knows? AJ may end up just going straight into the rematch with Oleksandr Usyk. He is training, I say, with AJ Fernandez. So he's not going to need really, you're not going to turn around and say, oh, he's going to need about 3 fights to get used to it. He's been with AJ Fernandez for years. He's just not been the main guy in the team. So we'll have a look and we'll see watch the space. Fernandez is certainly, in my opinion, for AJ and style wise, probably an improvement over Rob McCracken. But will he be able to bring another level out of AJ? Maybe there isn't. Who knows? Maybe AJ has hit his ceiling regardless of the trainer. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. But for now, I'll leave you with that. Let me know what you thought about what I touched on in this video. What are your thoughts on Wallin, Joyce, opponents? Do you think that Wallin is better than the Kamil Sakalovsky fight was? I certainly think he is. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed the video, lads and lasses. If you could, help your boy out, smash the like button. It does help. Really does help your boy out. For now, I'll talk to you. Peace.